The third instance where markets can have difficulties is what we call public goods. Okay. So as we kind of dive in and as we start going through public goods, I need to basically try to get you to forget about your preconceived notions of what public goods are, right? So that's why I try to do my best Yoda impression here. That is, I need you to unlearn some things, because many of you in your minds, when I say the word public good, you probably think something provided by government. You probably think roads, bridges, schools, right? You think about things that the government provides, right? Well, those aren't public goods, okay? And so I need you to unlearn some things. Public goods are goods that have two very specific characteristics, and that's what we're going to talk about, okay? So just keep in mind, when we talk about public goods, we don't necessarily mean things provided by the government. Now, as you'll see as we go through and talk about public goods, some people argue that public goods should be provided by the government because of the characteristics we're going to talk about, right? But public goods does not necessarily mean they are provided by the government, okay? We actually have a lot of public goods today that are not provided by government, okay? And you'll see as we go through, okay? So, again, public goods does not mean goods provided by the government, right? It means goods with two very specific characteristics, okay? So, public goods does not equal goods and services provided by the government. So, get that out of your head, okay? Now, what do we mean when we talk about public goods? Okay. For a good to be considered a public good, it has to have two very specific characteristics or properties, okay? The first one is what we call non-excludable. That means it's a type of good that even if I wanted to exclude people from using it, it would be difficult, right? So that's why most goods are not public goods, right? So, for example, my laptop, right? I can exclude you from using it, right? I can lock it in my office, right? I can say you can't touch it. I can close it. I can put it in my laptop bag, right? I can exclude you from using it. So most goods are excludable, right? Most things you own, your clothes, your shoes, your car, it's excludable, right? Your car, you lock it. That way no one can get in it, right? You're excluding people from using your car, right? So most goods are excludable. There are certain goods, though, that are non-excludable. That is, it's difficult or impossible to exclude others from enjoying the good, okay? And a lot of times this is the case because private property rights are not clearly defined and enforced on the good, right? Let's think about air, right? Can I exclude you from using the air? Well, it's kind of difficult to do, right? Well, who owns the air? I don't know. We all do. Nobody does, right? So again, you get these certain goods, certain situations where property rights aren't clearly defined, right? The property rights on my laptop are very clearly defined. It's mine. I can lock it. The property rights on your car are very clearly defined, okay? Okay, so they're goods where it's difficult to keep people from using the good, okay? The second aspect of the good is that the good also has to be non-rival in consumption. All right, what does this mean? All right. This means multiple people can use the good at exactly the same time and enjoy the benefit of the good, and my benefit of using the good does not take away from your benefit of using the good, okay? So that's why the first bullet here says, my consumption of the good doesn't mean you can't consume the same good at exactly the same time, okay? So that's why as we go through these 2 points here, it's helpful to kind of think about a radio station. Not sure what's going on with my throat there. Think about a radio station, right? Let's think about the first one, non-excludable. Once a radio signal has been broadcast, it's impossible to exclude people from receiving it, right? I mean, again, radio signal will eventually dissipate, and beyond a certain distance, you won't be able to receive it. But within a particular city, right, once a radio station has broadcast its signal, Anybody can tune in, right? So it's non-excludable. It's also non-rival in consumption, right? I can be sitting there with my radio, tuning into that radio station, and maybe you live in the house right next door to me, and you're tuning in with your radio to the exact same radio station, right? We can both listen to it, we both enjoy it. My use of the radio waves, my tuning into that radio station, doesn't take away from yours, right? It's not like when I tune in on a radio station, if you're listening to it next door, you're like, geez, Dr. Connors just took all my radio reception. That's not the way it works, right? We both can tune into it, okay? That's what we mean by non-rival in consumption. Most goods are rival in consumption. That is, when I'm eating a burrito, that's a burrito you can't have. You and I cannot enjoy the same burrito at the exact same time, right? So most goods are rival in consumption. When I consume or use a good, that particular good you can't have, right? So that's why public goods are very specific goods. They're goods that have two properties. It's non-excludability, that is, it's impossible to keep people from using the good. And the second one is that everybody can use the good at exactly the same time. So they're these weird special cases of goods, okay? All right, so let's go through some examples, okay? Let's think about national defense. All right, first off, is it non-excludable? Okay, well, if the United States is providing national defense to the 50 states, and let's say the state of Iowa says, you know what, we've had it. We don't want to pay for national defense anymore. You can leave us out of your national defense strategies, right? Can we realistically do that, right? Can we tell, hostile countries to us, okay, you know what, Iowa no longer has our national defense. So you want to attack them, have at it. Right? No, that doesn't make any sense, right? If Iowa gets nuked, the states around it are going to be affected as well, right? So when our country provides national defense around the 50 states, right, every state is included in that. You can't exclude a particular state from our defense stuff, right? And in some sense, Canada, even though they're not part of the U.S., benefits from our national defense, right? They just happen to be our neighbor. It's not like we can exclude them, right? If, North Korea wants to nuke Canada, we're probably going to be concerned about that, right? Because the nuclear fallout would affect us, right? So when we provide national defense, we generally can't exclude people from the benefit of that. So sure enough, it is non-excludable. Okay, second aspect. What about non-rival in consumption? That is, can everybody enjoy the benefits of national defense at the same time? Yeah, I'm sitting here in Florida, right? I can enjoy the benefits of national defense. Wherever you are, right, you have peace and safety and security as well, right? We're both enjoying national defense. My enjoyment of national defense doesn't take away from your enjoyment of national defense, okay? So yes, all right? So national defense is what we would be considered a public good, and it's an example of a public good that is provided by government, that is provided by government. Okay. Okay, let's go to the next example. What about radio, right? I've already talked about radio when I was going through public goods. And I already said radio is a good example of something that is a public good. Okay. So the first criteria, non-excludable, and we've already said yes, radio waves, once they've been broadcast, once they're transmitted, you can't exclude people from receiving the signal, right? All right, so it's non-excludable. What about the second aspect? Non-rival in consumption. Well, we've already talked about this as well, right? If I'm sitting there with my little radio, I can tune into those radio waves. You can be somewhere else tuning into the exact same radio waves, and we both get to enjoy that radio station at exactly the same time, and my enjoyment of it doesn't take away from your enjoyment of it, right? So yeah, it's non-rival in consumption. So, radio qualifies as a public good. Now notice, this is a public good that's not provided by the government, right? So this is public good. This is an example of public good that is provided privately. Right? Radio stations are owned by different people and there's a whole market and so forth. It's not provided by the government, right? So just because something is a public good doesn't necessarily mean it's provided by the government, right? There's lots of public goods that are provided for privately, okay? Okay, so let's go to another example, okay? Just to kind of illustrate, right, because so far we've talked about public goods, but we haven't really talked about what the potential problem of public goods are. So let's do it by going through this simple little example here. Okay, suppose we live in a small town, and I am going to make myself mayor or dictator, something like that, okay? Suppose we're coming up to the 4th of July, and many of us think, yeah, it'd be nice to have a fireworks display, okay? All right, so suppose a lot of people in our town value a fireworks display, and the benefit overall would be higher than the cost. That is, it's efficient. The benefits outweigh the cost. It'd be something we should probably do, okay? All right, first let's see if fireworks in this case, let's see if they're a public good. All right, first one, non-excludable. Well, when they're on the ground and before they've exploded, yeah, fireworks are excludable, right? But once I shoot those fireworks up into the sky and they explode in all kinds of vibrant colors, right? I can't stop you from seeing it. If you're close by, you're going to be able to see the fireworks display, right? So fireworks, when they're exploding up in the air, are non-excludable, right? And many of us have been near a fireworks display that we haven't paid for. It just happened to be close enough, and we stand there and we go, ooh, ah, wee, right? Yeah, fireworks are non-excludable, right? Anybody who's close by can watch a fireworks display, okay? All right, second aspect, non-rival in consumption, right? If I'm standing there looking up in the sky as fireworks explode and I get to see all the bright colors, my enjoyment of looking at the fireworks doesn't take away from your enjoyment of the fireworks, right? You could be a couple blocks away and looking up at the sky and enjoying the fireworks as well, right? My taking it in doesn't affect your ability to enjoy the fireworks, okay? So in this case, yeah, fireworks would classify as a public good, okay? All right, so suppose I'm a nice benevolent mayor / dictator in this town and I know, hey, lots of people like fireworks, so let's try to do this privately, okay? And so I go around and I basically say, hey, everyone talked about this fireworks display. Now let's start to pitch in. Let's contribute so we can have this fireworks display, okay? Well, this is where we run into what's called the free rider problem. A lot of people in my town, in our town, might realize, hey, I know that fireworks are a public good, which means if someone puts on a fireworks display, I can enjoy the display and I don't have to pay for it, right? Because it's non-excludable, right? And so maybe I want fireworks, but maybe I don't really want to pay for them, right? So when the mayor comes around and says, hey, do you want to contribute to the fireworks display? I say, you know, finance is a little tight right now. I can't spare the money to help pay for the fireworks display, right? So public goods have what's called the free rider problem. This is someone who enjoys the benefits of a good without having to pay, okay? This term comes from people who jump the turnstiles at metros and big cities and ride the trains without paying. They're called free riders, right? So they're using the good without paying. So public goods have the free rider problem, right? Because we can't exclude people from enjoying the good, people who don't pay can enjoy the good, right? People who don't pay for the fireworks display can show up, look up in the sky, and enjoy the fireworks display, okay? So this is one of the issues that public goods run into, right? They suffer from the free rider problem, right? And that is what happens is that we typically would think that a market doesn't provide enough of the good Again, remember the term we use, this is called under provision. Under provision. Market doesn't provide enough of the good as society would want. Okay? Now, again, you could argue, well, how do we know what society wants? That's a good question. So that's something we can discuss later. What do we exactly mean by what society wants, right? But in these simple examples, right, we could argue that, hey, more people want the fireworks display than not, but people are able to be free riders, and so they don't pay for the good, so we might not have a fireworks display, okay? So, because people free ride, there's an under provision of the good, and the fireworks display might not take place, okay? So, what if instead we take a different approach? And I say, you know what? I am the mayor/dictator in this town, and come heck or high water, we are going to have a fireworks display. So we're going to put on a fireworks display, and I'm going to tax all of you, okay? So, well, if we did that, then we would have a fireworks display, okay? So the alternative and the way to solve the free rider problem is you have government do it, you tax everyone, you provide the fireworks, right? Okay, so that would work, kind of. It would solve the free rider problem, but it also kind of creates some other problems, right? Before, when we would voluntarily collect money to put on a fireworks display, only the people who wanted fireworks had to pay for the fireworks, right? But if the government does it and taxes everybody, then you're going to have many people who don't want fireworks now have to pay for fireworks. Okay? And some of them could be for legitimate reasons, right? Suppose, right, many of you probably have dogs, right? And you know how thrilled many dogs can be when fireworks are going off, right? A lot of times dogs are freaking out, right? The noises that are made mess with their ears. My neighbor, back when she had her dog, before her dog passed away, every time before 4th of July, she'd have to go to her vet and get these basically tranquilizers to sedate her dog so that the dog wouldn't freak out through the whole night while the fireworks are going off, right? So there's a lot of good reasons why people might not want a fireworks display, right? And now we've just forced them to have a fireworks display, and they have to pay for it, even though it's something they don't want, right? Okay, so this would solve the free rider problem, but creates some other issues, right? And that is, with government, we get one size fits all solutions, right? And this is something we're going to talk about in chapter 6, but remember, with a market, you get trade and exchange that's mutually advantageous to both sides, right? Generally, buyer and seller benefit, right? But with government and majority voting, right, you're always going to have a minority party. You're going to have some losers, right? And so market exchange, market transactions generally don't have losers, right? But if we turn to government to do it, we're always going to be stuck with some minority group that doesn't want it but just happened to lose the election, okay? Okay. So, in addition to people having to pay for a good they might not want, right? We've already talked about that. The other thing that's left out is something we already know to be true, right? We live here in Florida, right? Tons of fireworks displays are provided privately, right? Just because it's a free rider problem, just because people might mooch and take in the fireworks display, doesn't mean we need to have government force people to pay for it, right? If you grew up anywhere near Disney World, man, every day, a couple times a day probably, I can't remember, right? They're always shooting off fireworks over there, right? Disney's a private company, right? Fireworks are oftentimes provided privately. I mean, sometimes cities will do fireworks displays, but usually around 4th of July or New Year's Eve, fireworks displays a lot of times are provided privately, okay? So just because the free rider problem exists doesn't mean you can't provide fireworks or a public good privately, okay? Now, the story of lighthouses, this is another example of something that is considered a public good, right? So lighthouses are a public good. And a lot of people argue that lighthouses needed to be provided by the government. Now, we don't really need lighthouses anymore. We have GPS and all kinds of fancy navigation systems to help us not run into rocks when we're out in the ocean on ships, right? But it turned out, back in the day, most lighthouses were actually not provided by the government, even though they're a public good, right? Most lighthouses were funded by money collected at the nearby dock or marina. Right? The dock or marina would make you pay to put your ship in there, and then some of that money would go towards paying for the lighthouse, right? So again, just because a public good has a free rider problem doesn't necessarily mean it needs to be provided by the government, right? A lot of times public goods are provided privately, okay? Okay, now the last piece here as we kind of wrap up public goods is we've talked about this fireworks display and lighthouses and how to provide them privately versus publicly. The other thing to keep in mind is if you are going to use government to provide a particular good, how much of it do you provide? Right? And depending on who you ask in government, they're going to give you a very different answer, right? This is politics, right? Politics is not necessarily going to give you a right answer. It's going to give you an answer, but it might not be the right answer, right? So let's think about policing, police force, how much police we should have, right? The last couple of years, with some of the turmoil on police forces and some of the riots that have happened, right, there's been pushback against police forces, right? So you've got people who are very much supportive of the police, and you've got people who are critical of the police. They're both involved in politics, right? So how much do you decide? How do you decide how much police provision to provide, right? Well, various interest groups are going to compete, right? So if you ask the police unions, they're going to say, we need more policing. If you ask the American Civil Liberties Union, right, the ACLU, they're probably going to argue less. Who's right? I don't know, right? That's the issue with politics, right? You're going to have interest groups and politicians negotiating these things. Are you really going to get the efficient amount? Or are you going to get what society wants? No, it's going to go through the political process, right? So just because you might want to use government to provide a particular public good doesn't mean you've solved the problem. It means you now are dealing with a public good in the political sphere, which also has its host of problems, okay? All right, and that's a wrap on our discussion of public goods.